Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about Springboard's mission, and it was sort of written here so that we could all have a cheat sheet. Given Springboard's mission and experience, how might Springboard as an organization help meet the challenges faced by schools? Are there skills that are not being taught or gaps in where external providers like Springboard could be especially useful?
I think one of the things that really is important for organizations that are like Springboard and those that are sort of sitting out here on the edge is that you don't sit on the edge, that you really begin to think about yourself as an extended learning opportunity. We've been talking a lot about extended school days and extended learning, and I think you have to think about yourself as an extension of what's happening in the schools. So if you think about what happens in the schools and you're being, okay, what's the next thing and how do you add value to that? I think there's a couple things, and I'll answer the last question and this question sort of at the same time, because there are a couple things I think we have to pay attention to. One is, I think what's relevant to kids today is different than what was relevant to all of us. And I think so because the world's changed. So what makes math and science relevant for them and why they need to learn whatever it is they need to learn, I think is very different. And I think this organization in particular has an opportunity to support kids in being able to apply and to be able to really think about why they're learning in school, what they're learning. So I think that's an opportunity. I think there's also a socio-emotional opportunity, and I think that's a place where kids are different today. They're dealing with each other in different ways. Their whole social networking is very different. I'm not a Facebook person, but but they all are. And so I think that's another thing that we have to address. I think the global part of who Springboard is and that international piece, I think is very important. I think that's a piece that's an added value of this organization and an extended learning opportunity for this organization that addresses who kids are now. The challenge is, how do you engage them? How do you not have them come home? My son comes home every day and says, Mom, I'm bored at school. And how do you have them so they're not bored, and how do you engage them? And again, I think you have an opportunity to maybe be able to engage kids in some different ways that they're not being engaged, in school, or in ways that it's just, you just have a different opportunity because of what you can do, and the environment in which you're serving kids. So I think that's all very important as you think about who is it, what do you add, what's the value that's added from an organization like this. And you think about your mission in terms of critical thinking and creativity and collaboration. Those are all the pieces that we want kids to have, that we want to make sure they have, and that's, I think, the value that you're bringing to the table. It's going to be important as you work with schools, and that's very integrated as opposed to sitting out here working separate from them, and working with kids in a much more integrated fashion, because you do bring added value to them.
Hi, Inda, you want to add to that?
I think I do.
I think, and you know what, I see Shirley here. I think I'm going to have to say something about Room for Writing. Is that all right? When? Okay, so is everybody familiar with the program that we ran, Springboard ran from 2000?
No, you're going to have to describe it.
Oh, okay. So in the 2004-2005 school year, I was teaching artists for Springboard, and I was placed in a school in North City called Gunlock Elementary, SLPS. It's shuttered, but I had a great year there. It was a great principal. It was a great building. The kids, the families were focused. People were happy that we were there, and there were a lot of empty rooms. Quite a few empty rooms because the population was shifting in the neighborhood. And Wendy and I got to talking in the spring of, well, maybe in the middle of that year, and we developed a program and we called it Room for Writing. We worked with the district and with the principal directly to occupy, and I know it's a loaded word now, but we occupied a room in the building as a Springboard program, and we called it Room for Writing. And it was situated in the building, but it was a Springboard program. So we had this very unusual insider-outsider status in the building. And kids, it was a pull-out program, so the kids came to our room. It was I and two other teachers, a poet and a historian, kind of American studies person. And the three of us rotated the days, we rotated hours, and we developed a wonderful model, a pilot for what this kind of super saturation of a Springboard program could be. Now, you know, Carole used the word extension, and I would just also say, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I think there's this process where you can inject something into a cell to accomplish something. I don't know what you can call it, but that's what this felt like. It was an injection of a certain kind of way of being a student that was very different from what happened when they walked down the hall back to their regular classroom. And we somehow managed to do that without alienating the classroom teachers. On the other hand, you know, I should say, actually, they were incredibly grateful we were there, because they could say, oh, this kid never wrote more than a sentence, and then suddenly she's writing. Or so-and-so was dreading school, but now Wednesday I noticed on my, I can see I'm keeping track, there's never a missing person on a Wednesday, because there's room for writing on Wednesday. And what all we did was do what we do as Springboard specialists, but we did it from a home base. And we did it very shoulder to shoulder with the classroom teachers and with the principal, and the literacy coach, or I don't know what if she was called the literacy coach back then, but so it was hand in hand, but it was, and there was a little bit of tension at times between the sort of these tests that they would have to administer. For example, in April, we'd be out of the building in April pretty much while they were testing, and then we'd come back for a little bit before the end of the year. But I only broach this and digress to this history because there are ways of injecting, extending, building what it is Springboard does into the system. If the system's ready for it or willing to accept us, and we only had positive feedback from that.
This question is for Ty, actually, and then other people can add to it. Springboard is very interested in being accountable to schools. We and you want to know if we've made a difference, if we're doing anything positive. Do you see this as an important goal? I mean, given that we're doing so many different things, how can we think about accountability in a way that makes sense to you all?
I think it ties into the previous question as well. You know, as I think about the critical thinking and the arts and sciences and humanity, I think, and as my colleague said, I think the context in which kids are learning and being exposed is also essential. And I think that's part of the accountability. As you know, the way students learn, the way we educated students in the past, the context didn't matter. The context was about what we wanted them to know. I think what's essential now is their context is taken into consideration in their learning. For example, music. I mean, our students listen to music that many of us don't listen to. It has a context for them, despite if we like it or not. It has meaning to them. Getting them to use that as a means of writing, connecting to history, to connect to math. You know, when we think about the higher levels of math and parabolas and things of that sort, does music exhibit some kind of patterns? That's stuff that I think making those connections with Springboard and different arts and critical thinking are essential. When we think about poetry, it has a meter, a beat, a feeling that emulates because you hear it. Kids don't always get that just because we're teaching literature in a common arts class, but maybe having someone from Springboard come in and show that connectivity, that it's not a grade, but it still is holding kids accountable. You're giving kids multiple contexts in which to connect their learning. I mean, think about art. There's a science and an art to art. There are lines, there are compositions, there are shades. That's important. Think about that in writing, getting kids to think about the effect of adjectives on nouns. I mean, there are many ways we can make the connectivity, but we don't always think of it that way because we get caught up on the test scores, the MAP scores, the ACT scores. No, they don't ask those questions. But that context is important for kids to draw from to be able to make that application in multiple settings. So I don't think it's something that Springboard needs to be held accountable to, but I think there's a partnership that can exist to help us extend the learning beyond just simple, this is what's in the book, or this is what's on the test, or this is what the state or the federal government expects you to know. How is it contextual? How do you feel that? I mean, what about those kids that are kinesthetic learners? Or me sitting here talking to them is not going to be their strength. But having them play with some Play-Doh and build models might be. And if we're just going to teach one way because we think it's what's on the test, we're setting those kids up for failure. And so I think that's where Springboard has been really, helpful in many of our schools. I mean, I remember many projects when they come in and help build murals and and those kids can tell you about every aspect of that meal. They might not remember a fact in history, but they remember that experience. And if we can connect that to reading, writing, arithmetic, computers, or whatever, I think that's where the strength of the partnership is from.
So, Ty, I'm going to push you on this one a little bit more. So, in terms of what you think schools want from us in terms of data, what is it that we could give you that would say, this has been a successful program, this one is less successful?
I guess my answer to that is still contextual. It might be successful in one district and not in another one, not because it's not a good program. The structure and the time and the place might be not be appropriate for the kids at that point in time. You know, one of the things that I truly believe is that kids can be, part of kids' success is the background knowledge that they bring to the table. It's no different. When we go to a job, if I don't know how to do computer work and the job requires me to do computer work, I'm not going to be successful, no matter how smart I am. But if I have some experience with technology, and that's what the job requires, I might not be the smartest person, but I understand technology, I can be successful. I think it's the same with that. And so if there's a writing program, and the kids are really strong and really have a background in writing, they might really soar with that. And it might not be that the kids, it might be that partnership is really taking that kid to the next level. You could walk into the same program in another school, and the kids are struggling with writing in a broad context. They don't have any of the foundational pieces of writing. It's not the program that's the problem. The kids don't have the background knowledge to go to the next level where you might want it to go. So I think it's contextual to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's where the partnership is important. I think it's important that the school and whoever's going to provide the service really map out what is it that you want to accomplish and where you are now. Because for some schools, it might be 2 steps, and for some schools, it might be 8 steps to get to the same place.
So at the end of the day, it's not about whether kids get out of 3rd grade. It's not about whether they get out of junior high or graduate from high school or college. It's about whether or not they become contributing citizens. And this organization, like many, are really trying to help kids to give them access to things that they don't necessarily typically have access to, and get them to be, hopefully, you're going to add to the fact that they become contributing citizens. So when we think about what it is that an organization like this does, we have in the past tried very desperately to grasp onto whatever data points we can grasp onto, and it's very, very difficult because there are so many variables and there are so many things that are impacting those kids all at the same time. So in town, one of the things, there's a group of people we've been having this conversation about that every kid ought to have a Carfax. Right? So you know what a Carfax is. You buy a car and everything that's happened to that car is right there at your fingertips. And that every organization that touches a kid ought to have a Carfax on every kid that they spend any amount of time with, and you can decide what that amount of time is. If you do a program for kids and they're there for 30 minutes or an hour, okay, it was nice you did the program and they were there. What you really care about are the kids that you're going to spend a long period of time with. And how do you impact them? And you're hoping that this is one way that you're going to impact and you're going to really challenge and engage a certain group of kids. That there will be kids who come here because this is the arts and this is a way that they want to be engaged. And there's going to be other kids that are engaged through sports and other kids that are engaged with other kinds of things. But the fact is you're giving them access to that. So if you think about the kids who come to you and you think about developing this Carfax and all the kids who come, and you're able to see a change in individual kids and then groups of kids as they move through your programs, and you really understand who they are and how their interests have changed, and are they going to school more, and what's going on with them. To me, that's the kind of data that you really want to have, and that's the kind of data you really want to know. And at the end of the day, whether schools want it or not, it really doesn't matter, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that you have a way to talk to funders and you have a way to sustain the organization, and that you're making a difference in the life of kids, because that's the end game. You just happen to do it in the way that you're doing it.